y'all. Welcome back to the saloon. It's been a minute. Before we go any further, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you'll never ever miss an episode of Shiloh Saloon Stories. Also, when you subscribe, like, comment, any of that stuff, share it with a friend. It helps me, get perks that YouTube offers an artist. All kinds of those wonderful, wonderful things. Well, I'm going to take a little, go off the beaten path here for a minute and not talk about a musician or anything this episode, but talk about what it was like being a musician living in a town that was being terrorized by a serial killer. And that serial killer was BTK. That's right, folks. I lived in Wichita, Kansas for 6 years. From North Carolina, from Statesville, but for some reason I made the crazy decision to move out to Wichita, Kansas for 6 years. And I was there during BTK's reemergence. So I just want to go ahead and tell you first off that I'm not giving any kind of details about the case. This isn't really about the case per se. There's a lot of true crime things that you can look at, I'm sure you know, on YouTube to find out about the BTK killer, whose initials stood for bind, torture, kill. Not a pretty story, though. I do advise you that there won't be any kind of things here that are graphic or anything that if you're sensitive that you have to worry about. I'm not going to go there. But I would let you know that if you are going to dive into the BTK case, that it is very graphic and very disturbing. So be forewarned if you do go down that rabbit hole. But this is more about what it was like living in a town that is in the grips of a psychotic killer, and especially what it was like being a musician, because I know that musicians nowadays, there's not too many bars per se left. It's most of the time a musician will find him or herself playing in a brewery or a setting like that, a festival. The seedy bar scene that used to be around, those things no longer really, they just aren't that prevalent. But in Wichita, Kansas, there were a ton of bars, and they were seedy kind of places that I played early in my career because I was just cutting my teeth and trying to find my way. So I want to talk about what it was like being in that atmosphere when there was a serial killer. I thought it would make for an interesting episode and a little different episode. So just getting that out of the way, you don't have to worry about any gory details or anything. This is more of what it was like from my experience. Now, I will say that I guess it was a year or two before, I really had not known much about serial killers other than like Charles Manson, Ted Bundy. I remember hearing my granddad talk about him and my mom when that was a case. In fact, I can even remember, I think I was in 6th grade or 7th grade when they executed him, and Ted Bundy was such a well-known serial killer that we went in the bathroom and flicked the lights when they electrocuted him. We didn't even know who he was. We just knew somebody was getting electrocuted, and we were kids. But I guess it was about a year or two before I had come to North Carolina to visit my grandparents at the beach. We went on a beach trip, and I was living in Wichita, but this was around the time of the DC sniper. So we were right there, not too far. The beach we went to, was only probably 5 or 6 hours from where all that stuff was taking place. So that was kind of my first exposure to, following a serial killer case or something like that. But BTK was a serial killer in Wichita, Kansas, and from 1974 until 1991, between that period of time, he took the lives of 10 people. I first heard about BTK, there were 2 places I first heard about BTK. One was when I first moved, the girl I moved to Wichita with, her uncle and I were riding around one day in the car, and I don't know what the conversation was about, but all of a sudden he pops up and says, yeah, Wichita, Kansas used to have a serial killer. And I'm going, Wichita, Kansas, this is like the most boring place in America, and in my opinion, it was at the time. But I'm sitting here going, no way out here in corn country, and all these flatlands where there's nothing. This isn't like a metropolis city. Little did I know about serial killers. And I was sitting there going, that's an urban legend. BTK. I said, what is that? He goes, bind, torture, kill. I said, come on, man. I said, it's an urban legend. No, really, we had a serial killer around here. So I just didn't say much more about it. I didn't want to appear rude or whatever, but I thought the guy didn't know what he was talking about. So you fast forward about, I don't know, a couple years, and I am working in a hat store called Hatman Jack's in Wichita, Kansas. Blocked hats, shaped hats, steamed hats, cleaned hats, sold hats, you name it. If it could be done with a hat, I did it. I was there when famous people came in the hat store, like Pavarotti came in one time. They closed the whole store down for him. Taj Mahal came in there and bought a hat. Charlie Daniels was good friends with Jack, the owner of Hatman Jack, so he would stop by from time to time if he was in town doing a show. But anyway, when I was working at Hatman Jack's, Jack had all these friends that would stop by that were, prominent people in the city. He was on the city council, I think, or something like that. But so he was kind of connected. And a guy, a lawyer, I think he was a former lawyer named Robert Beatty, was one of the people who used to stop by the hat store. Well, at the time, I didn't know really much about BTK once again, but in hindsight, and I put all this together, I remember him coming in the hat store around that time and talking about a book that he was writing about BTK. And, I kind of, it resonated a little bit, but didn't think much of it. And because of this book, supposedly, is what lured BTK out of hiding, because he ended up, during this time, sending a letter to the Wichita Eagle, not a letter, but Vicki Wegerly, I think is her name, her driver's license to the Wichita Eagle, which her murder was a crime that had not been solved. But basically, they linked it all together that I think the return address was like basically a name that if you took it up, the first letters from every name, it added up to be BTK. And like I said, you can look more into this if you want to. But this guy had basically been dormant since the 70s. I mean, they thought that he either died or he was, in prison. People just didn't have a clue, but he hadn't been around for a long time. But in the 70s, this guy was the boogeyman. I mean, people would literally, when they would go to their house, they would check their phone line outside to see if it had been cut, because that's one of the things that he did when he broke into people's houses to murder them. He would cut their phone line so there'd be no way that they could call out. Well, when he reemerged and sent this letter to the Wichita Eagle, and the police and FBI and everything confirmed that this was real, this was not a hoax, it has to be from the killer of Vicki Wegerly, who they later confirmed was a victim of BTK. Before that, they just didn't know. They thought that, they thought at one point, I think her husband even killed her. But bless his heart, goodness gracious, I can't imagine. But so when he reemerged, the town went nuts. People, locks sold out the first week. Ammo was selling out. I mean, people were scared of this man. And if you read up on his crimes, you can probably imagine why. I didn't know anything about his crimes. I just didn't know about BTK. And I was sitting here, the first day that came out that he had sent this evidence to the newspaper, I was sitting here thinking, well, what are people freaked out about? I mean, this guy's got to be in his, he's got to be in his 70s, or, 60s, not 70s, but I'm thinking he's an older gentleman. What damage can he really do? And that night I sat down at the computer and made the mistake of reading up on the crimes. And I can tell you that night I did not sleep. I stayed up until 6 o'clock in the morning, sitting in my recliner with a baseball bat and a butcher knife. And it was because I had an infant in the house. My son had just been born. He was not, I don't think he was even a year old when this was taking place. And so, I was petrified when I realized what was going on. And, he literally put a whole city in fear. From there, he started sending packages to different places. He would send them to Cake TV. Some of the packages he left in the parks. One he left at the public library. But in these packages, there would be evidence or trinkets that he had taken from his victims. And they were basically communications to the police. And later on, I think they would find out that he was doing this to get rid of evidence and tell his story on his terms, because he didn't like that Robert Beatty, mind you, the lawyer that came by the hat store, was writing a book about his killings. He wanted to tell them himself, apparently. And so the next morning after I got up and, from staying up all night, I remember I was a stay-at-home dad, and I ended up, I think around 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, I took my son to a play group. And I think it was probably the day after, a couple days after actually. But the point being is that I had seen in the newspaper, I think the next day, and that's why I say it was probably a couple days after, plus staying up all night, I don't think I would have been able to go to a play group. But anyway, so a couple days after, I had read in the paper where they released a sketch of BTK that someone had said, they'd seen him or whatever, a compository sketch. And it was very, 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 they weren't on to the right person at all. The sketch was of a blonde-haired guy with long, shaggy hair. I mean, it looked nothing like, they were totally off. Somebody had not seen the right person. But, from that composite sketch, I'm sitting in the line of Spangles, which is a fast food restaurant in the Midwest, which will also do oddly enough, I'll probably do a Shiloh Saloon story about my relationship with the Spangles franchise, which is a crazy story in itself. But we'll get to that one of these episodes down the road. But, I'm sitting there and I'm on the way to taking my child to a play group. And because I'm a stay-at-home dad around this time too, I think it was... not long after, I had already quit the hat shop by this time. I was playing music for a living. And I'm sitting in line at Spangles, and all of a sudden I look over, and there's this guy on the corner. And he's got long, shaggy, blonde hair. And this just will show you what hysteria will do, and being... what fear will do to people, including myself. I fell prey to it too, and you'll see why as I go on with this story. I immediately thought, there he is. He's right there on the street corner. It's BTK. And the guy was like staring back at me, or in my mind I thought he was. Who knows if he was or not, if it was just my perception playing tricks on me. But that was the start of, me feeling, freaked out, the whole town being freaked out, because he was on TV like nightly. I mean, that's all the news stations covered, local news stations, BTK, BTK, BTK. All the big news people were in town after a while. MSNBC, Fox News, all these places, CNN, they're all in town, because this guy is just daily taunting the police. And you don't know, you start thinking, well, he may be old, but if he's this brazen, is he going to kill somebody else? Has he got another victim and, sought out that he's scoping out or whatever? It was absolutely crazy. I mean, they were going around, the investigators on the team, and were just like going up to people on the street and swabbing them for their DNA. What a swab is where they basically take a Q-tip and go inside your cheek and swab it for a minute and get DNA. They were going up to people off the street. They exhausted so many leads that's where it had gotten to. I knew some people that had been swabbed. They had been cleared apparently because they were never contacted again, but they had been swabbed. It got so crazy with the hysteria. I had a bass player that used to fill in for me from time to time. He was an older gentleman. He would have fit the age of BTK. He lived by himself in a creepy old house that had been left to him by his mother. And, he just didn't, he was weird anyway. He was always kind of odd. And I remember him coming to my house one night. In fact, he came over for dinner. And I'm sitting here, we're all sitting around, a couple of us at a table. And the more this guy talks, and I have a gig with him this night too. The more this guy talks, I'm going, yeah, I think George might be BTK. He fits the profile. I mean, but this is what it does to your head. And this guy, obviously he wasn't BTK. He was a nice guy. But it really starts messing with your head. And, around this time, I would be playing, like I said, these kind of working man, seedy bars, that were rough. People would get beat up. I mean, it was nothing to see fights inside a bar, to see crazy things happen. I mean, I could fill up many episodes of Shiloh Saloon stories just based on things I saw in my early 20s, for those few 3 or 4 years that I did that, until I kind of, was able to work myself out of that and do bigger and better things. I saw crazy things, but playing music late at night and being in those bars, you couldn't help but think to yourself, is he in here? I mean, this might be where he would hang out. It's a well-known fact that serial killers prey on, people that won't be missed, like prostitutes. And I'm sure there were prostitutes hanging out at some of these bars. I may have not known it. They may have not looked like prostitutes. But hey, like I said, these were bad places, They were the only place to play, though. There wasn't much more opportunity for a young musician trying to cut his teeth and get out there. And that's the only way to do it, is get out there and play in front of people. And so, especially late at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, some of these bars you play till it's closing time, till 2. And, you just sit in there and look around and see people, and you couldn't help but just hone in on some dude and be like, man, that guy just doesn't look right. But, then again, you'd been doing this for a while before BTK, and none of these people looked right. You know what I mean? They were always crazy, weird-looking people. But that didn't make it any better. And so around this time, I mean, I really, really started sleuthing. This is the early days of the sleuth stuff, but I feel like I came in on it, the internet sleuthing. This case affected me so much because, it was happening right there in front of you in your own city where you're living. And I basically would be on these chat rooms, message boards every day trying to figure this shit out, trying to figure out, put together with, look at other people's posts and figure out, well, they have a profile kind of laid out for him, or they figured out this. There was talk about, for a while that maybe he was related to somebody that worked on the railroad. And just all kinds of crazy stuff. Dennis Rader was BTK when he was caught. And they did finally catch him. His name was Dennis Rader, and he lived in Park City. That's where they caught him. And I'll never forget playing about, I guess it was probably a couple years or maybe a year and a half before he was caught. I remember the BTK stuff was going on. Of course, like I said, there was no, relation to Park City until they, found out who he was. But I remember I was playing. It's the only time I ever played in Park City. But Park City was only like 9 or 10 miles from Wichita. It was just a suburb. Okay, so this guy literally lived like 10 miles from me at any point that I lived in Wichita, because I lived in a couple different places when at the time he reemerged. But I remember playing that gig in Park City, and something just wasn't right about that place. Something wasn't right about the bar, the vibe in there. I don't know. And I don't know if that's just, because evil was lurking in that town, and a real intense form of evil. But anyway, the craziest thing about BTK that I can remember that happened, that I've experienced personally, One of his communications that he left was at the public library. I think it was like on a Saturday morning. I remember waking up and looking on the news and saw that they had like the library. You couldn't even get near it. It was taped off and all that stuff. And the police would never say what the package was that he had left. But a lot of people speculated, because they wouldn't let the public near it, which is just because it was basically a crime scene. But a lot of people speculated that it was a bomb. Well, it wasn't. I started giving guitar lessons at that time, to make a little extra money. And it all started from me getting contacted by a guitar store, which I would go across the street. They had a building, and give guitar lessons. And I'll tell you a funny story about this, because most of the people that came in, a lot of them were people that were, young kids, like in their teens. And it was so funny because, they didn't even want to take the guitar lessons. It was obvious that their mom and dad just put them up to it. And a couple of them, I'd just say, hey, this is horrible for me trying to teach you guitar if you don't want to learn. Do you just want to sit here and go to sleep, or do you just want to do something else, or hang outside or something, so I don't have to sit here and teach you this shit because you don't want to learn it? And it's hell on me trying to teach any beginner how to play guitar. It was so funny. These kids would be like, yeah, man. They'd be like, pull out their, comic book, or, somebody go outside and smoke a cigarette. Don't tell my mom and dad. No worries. But anyway, so when I got rid of that gig, because basically I was sick of people bringing their kids and dropping them off on me, and they didn't want to play guitar, and I didn't want to teach them how to play guitar if they didn't want to learn how to play guitar. You want to learn how to play guitar? Great, I'm all in. But anyway, after I got done with that, to make a little extra money, I thought, well, hell, I could do this on my own. I can just put the word out that I'm giving guitar lessons, maybe get a couple students. Well, this guy that ended up coming out to see me play, he comes up to me and strikes up a rapport. Turns out he's a cop in Wichita. Really nice guy, turned out to be. But he was a blues enthusiast. He was really into blues music. Had just bought a National steel guitar, one of the brand new ones. And he says, is there any chance that you give me guitar lessons? And I'll never forget he said this. He said, I know I'm a cop, and you probably don't want to come to a cop's house. I don't know why that was or what made him think that, but I started going out to his house about once a week and would give him guitar lessons. Super nice guy. Really seemed to be an upstanding dude. And about the third lesson, which was oddly enough, I found this very odd, the last lesson. I don't know if it freaked him out what he told me, and told me something that he thought he maybe shouldn't have told me. But I remember we got around to talking, during the lesson we talk, and shoot the shit, I was kind of informal, and I was just, and so he says something about BTK. And I said, guys, I've been following the case. It's like, that's crazy stuff, and this was just around the time of the library drop that everybody thought was a bomb. And he says, he said, I shouldn't tell you this. He said, but there's a lot of talk around the precinct. And he said, the drop that he made at the library, he said it wasn't a bomb. And I said, really? He says, yeah. He said, I'll tell you what it is. He says, don't tell anybody. He says, he's got another victim picked out, and he's threatened to kill a woman and her child that he's been watching, I think he said in the fall. And thank God they caught him before the fall. And, I took it with a grain of salt. Who knows if it was true in the first place? Who knows if, what he heard was true? Believe half of what you see and nothing you hear. Especially on the internet, folks. But anyway, it was really wild, because when they did catch BTK, there was a really good book written about him that I read. And at the end of that book, it confirms that the police department did get in contact even with the sought out victim. Somehow they knew who she was and let her know, in case she had, had some weird, occurrences happen to her, before they called, and they wanted to, I guess figure all their timeline and everything out. So that really was true. He really had scoped out another victim and was planning to act, apparently. I'll never forget that I was playing on McConnell Air Force Base. Met a guy that was in the Air Force, had been in there for about a long time, and was a blues fan, and ended up hiring me and my band to come out there and play in their lounge, their bar, a couple times out there. It was really wild going on the Air Force Base, the security and the whole thing, but it was a great gig. And I'll never forget that Friday evening, I was at McConnell, and came on the news. Big police presence in Park City, Kansas. And immediately I knew, it's him. That something's happened, And I'll never forget waking up on Saturday morning and feeling such a sense of relief. I mean, really, even though at this point I didn't feel like I would be, in danger, but, it relieved, everybody felt relieved. I remember the captain of the police came on. They had a press conference about 10 o'clock in the morning. And the press conference began like this. The police chief stepped up to the microphone. He said, "Well, we got him." And everybody knew, I mean, it was just like, oh my God, thank goodness this maniac is off the streets. And that brings us to the end of this Shiloh Saloon stories. Sadly enough, there's a lot of more maniacs out there, and there's a lot of horrible folks out there. Y'all be safe, But think about who you know and who you trust, And also, folks, while you're thinking, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give me a like, give me a comment. Tell me how you think these things are rolling along. If something you'd like to see, if you know about my past or as a musician or the things you've seen me do, maybe you have an idea for a Shiloh Saloon story. Let me know, because all this subscribing and all this stuff opens up YouTube even further for me and allows me to make you more content, more shows, more entertainment. That's all from me. I'll catch y'all next time.